On March 44 BC, a man stepped into the Senate chamber. It was the final days of winter, but the air was unreasonably warm, that kind of oppressive heat that just make togas cling to the skin. Merchants could be heard shouting in the streets, and you could even hear the distant sound of a blacksmith's hammer. But inside the Senate house, there was silence. As the man walked through the chamber, several senators started appearing from behind the shadows. The man simply stared at the senators, not really knowing what they were doing, and the senators simply stared back. Then one of the senators stepped forward, and he was carrying something in his hand. And as soon as this man, Julius Caesar, noticed what he was holding, he stopped dead in his tracks, and his eyes widened in horror. Welcome to Tales of a Bard. Today we'll be exploring the assassination of Julius Caesar, the events that led to it, the significance it had to Roman history and society, and whether it was even necessary at all. Gaius Julius Caesar was a man whose ambition really knew no bounds. He had already reshaped Rome with his reforms, consolidating power in a way that made a lot of people nervous. Then whispers started to sound in the market, in the Senate, everywhere, that Caesar was not really after power alone, that he wanted to become the one thing that Romans swore that they never wanted to bow to again: a king. Even his way of dressing started to change. He started wearing the same red boots that Roman kings used to wear, started wearing a laurel crown on his head, like a monarch, not just a general. And then, at a Senate meeting, Caesar would do something that would shake Rome to its core. He didn't stand. Now, granted, I know this may not sound like much, but in Rome this was an unspoken declaration of power. The kings of old had sat while others stood before them, and now so did Caesar. A small group of his followers even went as far as to crown one of his statues. But when a tribune named Marillus arrested them, Caesar accused him of trying to tarnish his name and reputation and had him imprisoned. For context, the tribunes were elected officials from the Roman military that originally started out as infantry commanders. These were men who were meant to be untouchable, but not even them were now saved from the hands of Caesar. And then came the moment that would seal Rome's fate. At the festival of Lupercalia, which was this big festival in ancient Rome meant to celebrate fertility and purify the city, Mark Antony, Caesar's loyal ally, came running through the festival, dressed in ceremonial nakedness, carrying a crown. The crowd went silent. Some groaned, some nodded in approval, but Caesar did something that no one really expected. He refused the crown. At this, the crowd roared in approval. Then Antony tried again. Caesar refused again, and he declared that only Jupiter was king. At this, the crowd went absolutely crazy. Some call this a test, a political game just to see how people would react. But to many, it was very clear. Caesar was just waiting for the right moment. He actually wanted that crown. To some, it was a joke. But to the men who would soon call themselves the liberators, it was the final warning. If Caesar wasn't stopped, then Rome was doomed. And so, they made their decision. Not all the men who plotted against Caesar were moved by noble intentions of saving the Republic. For some, it was much more personal. Some had grudges against him, betrayals that they couldn't forgive, and ambitions that were squashed by him. One of the men, Trebonius, had been one of Caesar's most trusted allies, rewarded with power and prestige. But then, in a single moment, Caesar humiliated him. Caesar appointed a replacement consul for Trebonius' colleague just one day before the end of his term, something Trebonius did not take lightly. But this wasn't his first attempt. Trebonius had already floated the idea of assassinating Caesar. He had once approached Mark Antony and kind of suggested that they might want to get rid of Caesar, but Antony completely refused, and that plan died before it could even take shape. The next one didn't. In the case of another conspirator, Gaius Cassius, Caesar had rewarded him with the government of the Roman provinces of Bithynia and Pontus. But this man had a brother who had been exiled for reasons lost to time. He begged Caesar to bring his brother back. Caesar refused. That was all it took. That refusal alone was enough for him to join the plot. Even some of Caesar's closest friends turned against him. Publius Casca had known Caesar for years, but the favor had faded. His wealth had dwindled, and Caesar, his powerful and influential friend, had done nothing to help him. His frustration grew into rage, and when his brother Gaius joined the plot, It was clear for him, Casca was in it for good. Then there was Pontius Aquila. Once during one of Caesar's triumphs, Aquila had refused to stand in respect. Because of this, Caesar humiliated him in front of the entire crowd. And if that was not enough to turn Aquila for good, Caesar proceeded to seize land from him and give it to his lover. That was personal. And so, Aquila joined the plot. Servius Galba had fought alongside Caesar in Gaul. Gaul was this ancient region in Western Europe, which is now France, Belgium, Luxembourg, and parts of Switzerland, the Netherlands, and Germany. Servius was a careful man. He had made the mistake of guaranteeing a loan for Pompey. When Pompey's land was seized, Galba was stuck with a debt. Caesar helped him to pay it at first, but when more debts came to light, Caesar just refused to help. Also, rumors began to run that Caesar was sleeping with his wife. Whether this was true or not, the damage was done, and this was enough for Galba to turn against his old friend. Quintus Legatius owed his life to Caesar. After the Battle of Thapsus, Caesar had spared him and even pardoned him again after he was accused of being involved in a conspiracy. But Legatius never forgot how close he had come to exile, or that Caesar even once executed a relative of his, even after promising mercy. The resentment festered, and so Legatius joined the plot. Lucius Minucius, a war-hardened veteran of Gaul, loyal to Caesar and made praetor in 45 BC, had expected to be rewarded with the province after his term, like so many before him. Instead, he was given a large sum of money. He felt basically like he was being paid off instead of being entrusted with power, and that was unforgivable. Last but not least, we have Brutus. Unlike the others, he was driven by a sense of duty to Rome rather than personal grievance. Though adopted by Caesar and loved by him, Brutus feared the rise of a monarchy. His mother had once been the lover of Caesar, but it was his belief in the Roman Republic that ultimately swayed him. When the Senate murmured of Caesar's growing power, Brutus saw no choice but to act. His decision was born not out of hatred for Caesar, but from the deep conviction that Rome must remain free. As for the others, some of their names are known, but most of them have been lost to history. Perhaps some genuinely believe that they were striking down a tyrant, liberating Rome from a dangerous ruler. But just as likely, many saw this as a chance to settle old scores, to take vengeance, to reclaim lost power, or to shape Rome in their own image. Each one of these men, whether driven by insult, betrayal, or ambition, had their own reasons to join the conspiracy, and each one of them ultimately played a part in the assassination that would change Rome forever. The wheels were now set in motion, the knives were being sharpened, and Caesar, he had no idea. The conspiracy took shape in whispers and shadows, but two men stood at its heart, Cassius and Brutus. Cassius was more of the recruiter, endlessly gathering more hands to the cause, and Brutus stood as the face of the plot. Basically, his involvement and his participation was the proof that this was in fact a noble act. Together, they gathered 58 others, each with their own reasons for joining, whether it was for personal revenge, political gain, or simply the desire to be part of something historic. At first, the plan was far more ruthless. The conspirators debated not only striking down Caesar, but also Antony and Lepidus, the two most powerful of his followers left standing. Without them, the fraction would crumble. But Brutus was completely against this. He argued that this was not meant to be a brutal act, but something to remove tyranny from Rome. Yet time was running out. Soon, Caesar would leave for his Parthian campaign, where he would be untouchable, surrounded by legions loyal only to him. The conspirators needed a time when he would be vulnerable, a time when they could have a chance to strike. And then the perfect opportunity came. Caesar called a Senate meeting just 4 days before his departure. The opportunity was too perfect to ignore. The Senate was a place where Caesar would be isolated from his guards. The conspirators could gather there unnoticed. They were certain that when the attack began, others would join them. There would even be armed men close by. A gladiator match was scheduled next door in the theater of Pompeii, and one of the conspirators owned many gladiators, so they could be used if needed. The night before, Caesar had Lepidus and another man, Decimus, for dinner. They dined and had wine and spoke long into the night. And at some point, one of them posed a question: what is the best way to die? At this, Caesar contemplated for a bit, then simply lifted his gaze and said, a sudden death. That same night, his wife was tormented by nightmares of his murder. In the morning, when Caesar made sacrifices, The omens were not really looking good for him. He was a superstitious man, and for once he listened to the warnings. He decided to cancel the Senate meeting, and he sent Antony to dismiss the assembly. When the conspirators heard this, they of course started to panic. If Caesar left Rome, their chance would be lost forever. Decimus, the same man who had dined with Caesar the night before, was sent to intervene. He told Caesar that the Senate would be deeply insulted if he did not dismiss them in person. Caesar hesitated, but ultimately he decided to trust his old friend. The stage was set. Caesar, completely unaware of the danger, walked right into the trap. The moment was finally here. By then, the secret was starting to leak. A friend of Caesar had caught wind of the plot, and he rushed to Caesar's house, desperate to warn him, only to find that Caesar had already left. Another friend ran to the theater of Pompeii, hoping to catch him, but it was too late. Even as Caesar made his way to the Senate, someone slipped a message into his hand, a warning. But surrounded by crowds, overwhelmed by the constant stream of petitions and notes, Caesar just simply tucked the message into his robes without reading it. This would be a grave mistake. When he arrived, the stage was set. The conspirators, daggers hidden beneath their togas, tried to mask the tension that hung thick in the air. Then there was a moment of terror. Someone approached Casca and told him, "Brutus has told me everything." At this, Casca completely froze. What was going on? Did someone leak the secret? Had they been caught? But then he let a sigh of relief. The man wasn't talking about the plot. He was referring to his campaign as Edile. Edile was a Roman political position similar to what a mayor does in modern times. Casca exhaled, and he started to compose himself. But that pressing anxiety was still there. They had to act. Another senator spoke quietly with Caesar, and for a moment the conspirators wondered, had word gotten to him? But the conversation was completely harmless, just another petition. Still, at this point, time was really running out. They needed to strike. As the meeting began, Trebonius moved swiftly, intercepting Antony and drawing him aside. Antony was a warrior, so he was a powerful man. If Caesar had even a moment to fight alongside him, they might carve their way out. Trebonius had to keep Antony distracted long enough for the daggers to strike. Inside the Senate chamber, Caesar took a seat beneath the statue of Pompey. Tullius Cimber approached Caesar first, pleading with him to please recall his brother from exile. And then, in one swift motion, Cimber grabbed Caesar's toga and yanked it down, exposing his shoulder. The signal was given. Casca was the one who struck first, but he completely missed his target. He just slashed Caesar on the shoulder. At this, Caesar just grabbed Casca's arm and he was like, "What are you doing?" Casca, now in panic, cried for help, and that was all it took. The others rushed in. Servilius Casca stabbed Caesar in the side. Cassius slashed his face, others struck his back, sliced his thigh. Caesar actually fought back. Even as blood was pouring from his wounds, he would not go down that easily. He had fought through countless battles, waded through blood and carnage to shape the world in his image. He wasn't about to die cowering. But then, Brutus stepped forward. As soon as Caesar saw him, it was at that very moment that he stopped struggling. Whether it was due to the loss of blood, the betrayal, or both, Caesar at that moment he simply gave up. He sank to the ground, and Brutus stabbed him in the groin. Caesar said nothing. He pulled his toga over his head, hiding his face, just as Pompey had done before him, when he too had been betrayed. The killing continued long after Caesar was dead. The conspirators stabbed his lifeless body over and over, their hands slick with blood. Some even cut each other in their frenzy, caught in the madness of what they had just done. Caesar lay in a pool of blood at the base of Pompey's statue, 23 wounds, but only one was fatal. They hadn't even been able to strike a killing blow against an unarmed wounded man. Of the 60 conspirators, most of them didn't even raise a dagger, and yet it was done. Gaius Julius Caesar was dead. And did his murder actually accomplish anything? The answer is not much. He was already an old man going on a campaign in which he probably would have perished. His death also led to years of civil war and eventually the Roman Empire. To some, he was a tyrant, an insatiable conqueror who sought to bend the Republic to his will. To others, he was a reformer, a leader who saw Rome's decay and tried to fix it before he was struck down. The truth is that perhaps he was a little bit of both. But one thing is very clear. His assassination had more to do with personal injuries, and hatred than an actual noble act to save the Republic. But what no one could deny was this: Caesar changed the world. By accident or design, his death set Rome on a new path, one that inevitably led to the rise of the empire. And his death leaves us with one very interesting question: what might have happened if he had lived? You let me know in the comments below. Thank you so much for joining me for today's tale. If you had fun or learned anything, be sure to drop a comment, like, subscribe, share the video with someone else. All of that stuff really helps a lot. Also, don't go without watching one of these 2 videos right here. Until the next tale, farewell, and may the gods smile upon you.